According to a new study, the 500 largest American corporations hold more than $2.1 trillion in accumulated profits overseas. And that's, of course, to avoid taxes. Now, the study that was released yesterday by two left-leaning nonprofit groups found that nearly 3/4 of the firms on the Fortune 500 list of biggest American corporations by gross revenue operate tax haven subsidiaries in different countries. What are some of these different countries that have lower tax rates? Well, these countries are Bermuda, Ireland, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Now, these two different groups looked at this, and one of them was the Citizens for Tax Justice, and the other is the U.S. Public Interest Research Group Education Fund, used information from the companies themselves, their own financial filings with the SEC, to reach their conclusions. Now, so they looked at their own data and said, yeah, you're hiding a lot of money overseas. $2.1 trillion, not just these, these 500 companies are hiding $2.1 trillion overseas in these tax havens. So these two groups looked at this. Now, who are some of the biggest offenders? Well, three of them included, and this is number one on the list, Apple. Yeah, Apple. No surprise, right? Apple is holding about $181.1 billion offshores, and that's more than any other company. That is the number one offender of these tax havens, these offshore tax havens. And they would owe, if they brought the money back and got taxed at 35%, they would owe $59.2 billion in taxes if they tried to bring it back. That's a significant amount of money that they owe in back American taxes. Now, as I said, according to the study, now who is the next offender? Good old GE, General Electric. They have $119 billion offshore and spread over 18 different tax havens. Microsoft is another one. That's holding $108.3 billion in 5 different tax haven subsidiaries. And finally, Pfizer, this rounds out the top 4. Pfizer is actually holding $74 billion spread around 151 different subsidiaries around the world. That's amazing. All in all, at least 358 companies, nearly 72% of the Fortune 500, operate subsidiaries in tax haven jurisdictions at the end of 2014. All told, these 358 companies maintain at least, and this will blow your mind, 358 companies hold 7,622 tax haven subsidiaries. Blows your mind. That's a ton of subsidiaries. Also, they can avoid U.S. taxes. Now, Fortune 500 companies hold more than $2.1 trillion in accumulated profits offshore to avoid taxes, with just 30 of the firms accounting for $1.4 trillion of that amount, or 65%, according to the study. So 30 firms hold a lion's share of the money held overseas that cannot be taxed. That's amazing. Now, how do they do this? How do they get away with this? Well, one of the ways that they get away with this is through a process called corporate inversion. Now, what happens is that a company can reincorporate their office abroad by having a foreign investor actually come in and buy the company. Now, they do this in a no-tax or low-tax company, for example, Bermuda, and they reincorporate in that different country, so now they're only subject to that country's tax rates, while still doing business in America. Basically, now they're considered a foreign or multinational corporation, and that's just one of the many tricks that they use to avoid U.S. taxes. Others just simply moving their headquarters overseas into another country so they can avoid U.S. taxes. And the thing about that is, like, they still have their offices here. They still have their buildings here. A lot of them still have their manufacturing plants here, some of them at least. So they still access our markets and sell here. They have their stores here. And they also use our infrastructure that we pay for. Our roads, our power grid, our water, our sewer systems. They use that stuff, but they don't pay into it. In fact, they avoid explicitly avoid paying into that. So who pays for them? We do, taxpayers. Now, how much do we actually get screwed out of? Now, that's a good question. According to the report, 57 of the companies said that they would expect to pay $184.4 billion in additional U.S. taxes if their profits were not held offshore. Their filings indicate that they were paying about 6% in taxes overseas compared to a 35% U.S. corporate taxpayer or tax rate. $184.4 billion. That's what we're getting screwed out of, because when they don't pay that tax, guess who does? We do. The taxpayer. Now, this report concluded that, well, we have something that we can actually do about it. Well, what is it? Well, they said that Congress can and should take strong action to prevent corporations from using offshore tax havens, which in turn would restore basic fairness to the tax system, reduce the deficit. I thought, people were worried about the deficit. Well, there's one way to reduce the deficit right there, and actually improve the functioning of markets in America. Now, fortunately for us, I don't see our Congress, which is Republican controlled, doing absolutely anything about this to solve the issue. Now, to be fair, the Democrats haven't exactly been great on this either. They haven't been doing anything to solve this problem either. There needs to be a national movement, a grassroots movement of people who are pissed off that the corporations can sit there and hide their money and stash their money and get us to pay their taxes to subsidize them. That comes from our pocket, goes right into theirs for stashing all their money overseas. We need a national movement. Whether or not you're progressive, if you believe in the issue and the concept of fairness, then you would join this movement in order to push our politicians into actually restoring actual fairness to our fucked up tax code. That's what needs to happen.